What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9 coming to you with another Star Wars Unlimited video. This time I'm going to be playing a super aggressive Sabine deck. It is double red Sabine with Tarkin Town, and I'm playing against Director Krennic with the Energy Conversion Lab piloted by ZuhairGalaxy. Should be an interesting set of games. We have we have 3 games here for you and we'll see how this goes. So, just a little strategy thoughts. So, Sabine Red is a super aggressive build. The goal is to try to just push damage through as fast as I can. And I'm not altogether happy about being paired up against Director Krennic, who is a more defensive character and has a lot of stuff that can get some value. So I'm going to play Sabine Red here. 2 cost 2/3 on attack. You may deal 1 damage to the defender or to the base. Has a special ability that makes it harder to target her under some circumstances. My opponent plays Admiral Piet. I'm then going to use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. My opponent takes the initiative here. So there's some discussion about whether or not it's good to use Sabine's ability to do damage if it means losing the initiative. My reasoning in this situation was I have an advantage right now. I don't care that much about Admiral Piet, and I'm hoping to just deal more damage before he can get some of his powerful later game stuff on the board. So when I see someone using command, usually that means it's going to be a ramp deck, and it's going to try to use cards that give resources faster than normal in order to get big end game cards out later on. So my reasoning is I want to be as aggressive as possible and try to do damage to him before he can get that late game stuff out. So Sabine is an interesting card for that. Now, one interesting problem here is on attack, Sabine can deal 1 damage to the defender or to a base, but Director Krennic gives damaged units +1 attack or +1 power. So it makes it so that Sabine's ability can actually be a downside here in some ways. My opponent plays entrenched for +3/+3 to his Admiral Piet, but then makes it so that the unit can't attack bases. So that is not something that I want to see. So I'm going to play a Fleet Lieutenant and just have Sabine go straight for the base. Um, and that's going to be 5 total damage, 4 from the attack, and then 1 from her on attack ability. The entrenched Admiral Piet then defeats Sabine, taking 2 damage himself. And I could take the initiative here. I could use Sabine's ability. In this case, I used Sabine's ability. That was probably a mistake. In this situation, I think it would have been more valuable to take the initiative. And the reason that I say that is that I could simply then attack with the Fleet Lieutenant into the base for 3 damage before my opponent has the chance to attack with Admiral Piet. But as it stands, his Piet is able to kill my Fleet Lieutenant before it can attack. So in that situation, I did 1 damage to both bases, but if I had given up my opportunity to do that and taken the advantage instead, I could have done 3 damage to just my opponent's base by having the Fleet Lieutenant go first. So that was a bit of a mistake there. I should have taken the initiative in that case rather than using Sabine's leader ability. Bit of a mistake there for sure. This time I'm going to use Sabine's leader ability early in the turn. I'm hoping to stall, so I want to deploy Sabine this turn. The problem is that if my opponent has Takedown, which is a 4-cost event, it can immediately defeat her as soon as I play her. So I'm trying to stall out and do other plays first in order to get my opponent to spend some resources on things that are not killing Sabine. I play a green squadron A-wing, 2 cost 1/3 with raid 2. Really strong unit and one that has made this deck a lot better in my opinion. Very, very powerful unit. And my opponent then plays a super laser technician, and now I'm like, great, a unit's been played here that means that there isn't the resources available to kill Sabine. I'm going to deploy Sabine now. Additionally, I think my opponent was maybe waiting to try to use the energy conversion lab to ambush the super laser technician in, but under the circumstances wasn't able to do that, and as a result won't be able to deploy Krennic. I deploy Infiltrator's Skill, or I play Infiltrator's Skill, giving Sabine +1/+1 and Saboteur. That's a very newly previewed card. So Sabine now a 3/6 with Saboteur. And I'll have her attack the enemy base for 3 direct damage +1 from her abilities. That's 4 more damage to the enemy base. And I'm trying to just push that damage through. I'm then going to use Tarkin Town to defeat the experienced Admiral Piet. I don't want my opponent to have the ability to do that ambush play, which they would be able to do if they resource a thing and have that super laser technician die. Also, that Piet just has strong stats, so the Tarkin Town activation there, clearing a valuable unit from the board from my opponent. And so right now the board's looking pretty good for me. I have a stronger unit in the ground arena than my opponent. My opponent has nothing in the space arena, whereas I have an aggressive unit. And additionally, the life totals favor me. However, my opponent is going to get that super laser technician to die this turn by attacking Sabine in all likelihood, putting them up to 6 resources, which is ahead of me and allows them to deploy some stronger endgame units. And Krennic is going to deploy this turn. So there's Krennic. He has a 2/7, which is not awesome stats, but he also gives a +1 power to every friendly damaged unit, and he has Restore 2. So Restore 2 is one of the reasons I wasn't thrilled to be playing against Krennic, as having that Restore power and having access to the more defensive blue cards does mean that it's going to be a little harder for aggro to push through. I think maybe the best deck against aggro is double blue Luke, which is, I think, quite challenging for them to defeat. But we'll see how this goes. So indeed, my opponent has the Super Laser Technician attack into Sabine. That's kind of expected, as it gives that extra resource. I'm going to take the opportunity to have my Green Squadron A-Wing swing in for 3 damage to the base. Krennic hits Sabine for 2 more damage, taking 3 himself, and heals the base for 2. Um, and so I am actually going to play Aggression here. And aggression, the double red card. So I'm going to choose to deal 4 damage to Krennic. And then the other effect that I'm going to use is to ready my A-Wing. And there's the reason that I'm thinking of doing this with the A-Wing. I could also ready Sabine, who's 3 attack, and would actually do 4 damage thanks to her ability if she got a chance to attack. But based on my opponent's play pattern, I think there's a good chance that he wants to ambush in something with the energy conversion lab. And my guess is that that's more likely to be in the ground arena than in the space arena. So if I ready my space unit, it won't get picked off by the energy conversion lab. And indeed, my guess was correct. My opponent sends in the Academy Defense Walker, a 6 cost 5/5 Sentinel, and does a nice little trick here. So you can resolve ambush and when played are resolved at the same time. So the player with initiative or the player who controls the effect or something, I believe it's the player who controls the effect, can choose what order to resolve them. So my opponent chooses to use the ambush ability first. Then, now that his Academy Defense Walker is damaged, he then resolves the when played, which will heal it, uh, or I'm sorry, which will provide it an experience token based on it having been damaged. So nice little trick there. I hit the enemy base with my Green Squadron A-Wing, bringing it down to just 5 life, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next. Sort of vacillating between different resource choices there. If my opponent doesn't kill my A-Wing immediately, I can play Surprise Strike and just win the game. Um, and then in the event that the opponent does kill the A-Wing immediately, I can play Aggression to kill the Academy Defense Walker and maybe draw a card. So indeed, we see maximum firepower being used. A friendly Imperial unit deals damage equal to its power to a unit. That means that the powerful Academy Defense Walker is able to take down my A-Wing. I play Aggression, and I'm going to choose 4 damage and draw. So that's going to defeat the Academy Defense Walker and draw me a card. And I think that I probably should have resourced the. So uh, I have a mission briefing in hand, and I think that I should have resourced my mission briefing instead of the Cantina Braggart, because I then could have played the Braggart and would be again threatening to win the game with a surprise strike. This time I have again a resource choice. I want to keep the surprise strike, and this time I think I end up deciding I'm going to resource the mission briefing. I'm not entirely sure. But the what I really would like to do here is play Dodana and then also play some other unit. So I end up resourcing the mission briefing. So I can now do Dodana plus the A-Wing or Dodana plus the Fang Fighter. And then if my opponent doesn't deal with both of those units, I can win the game with my surprise strike. However, we see a Colonel Yularen being played for my opponent. When you play a command unit, including this one, heal 1 damage from your base. My opponent then plays the Rugged Survivors, 5 cost 3/5 with grit, and on attack, if you control a leader unit, draw a card. But I'm just going to take the initiative here instead of playing out that second unit because Colonel I'm sorry, General Dodonna is now in a position to just win the game with my surprise strike. So this build is all heroic or aggression cards, except I have surprise strike in there as a kind of surprise game ender. So I have to pay an extra 2 for it because it's out of aspect. But the 4 cost surprise strike allows Dodonna to sneak in there for 7 total damage and win the game. So that's going to be a victory for me, and we're going to go to round two. Overall, I think I made a few errors that game, um, but I ended up being able to push through anyway. In particular, I think I would have done better if I had taken the initiative rather than use Sabine's ability in that scenario where my fleet was kind of ended up being able to be picked off. I'm not really used to playing this style of deck, so I think I have a lot to learn. And so this game, let's see here. My opponent leads off with a Colonel Yularen. I'm going to play the Cantina Braggart. 1 cost 0/3 with Raid 2. Not the finest unit in the game. And then I'm actually going to, or I erroneously tapped Tarkentown. What I meant to do was to exhaust Sabine for 1 to each base. And then I think I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to put the Infiltrator's skill onto the Cantina Braggart, making it a 1/4 Saboteur with Raid 2, which will allow me to attack and kill Colonel Yularen. The reason that I want to attack Colonel Yularen is that healing ability is going to be a big problem for me if left unchecked, because it will limit my ability to push through and play really aggressively. My opponent plays a Super Laser Technician here, but does not ambush it. Does get a resource there or does get a heal there from Colonel Alliance. The Super Laser Technician's a command unit. I have the Cantina Braggart defeat. I have the Cantina Braggart defeat Colonel Yularen. My opponent takes the initiative. I deploy an Alliance X-Wing and another Cantina Braggart. I then use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. So my opponent will be able to have the Super Laser Technician attack into the upgraded Cantina Braggart and kill it and also die, which will allow 5 resources and a Director Krennic deployment. And that's indeed what we see. So my opponent's at 5 resources, I'm at 4 resources. That means both leaders will be deploying at the same time. I deploy General Dodonna, who's going to buff up my Alliance X-Wing and will also buff Sabine once I deploy her. General Dodonna, 4 cost 4/4. Other friendly rebel units get +1/+1. Let's see what happens next. Director Krennic deploying there. Uh, at this point, I could deploy Sabine. I'm again kind of worried that we're going to see the takedown played against her. I attack with the Cantina Braggart for 2 to the base. My opponent subtracted 3 from the base, but I point out the Cantina Braggart is not a rebel, so does not benefit from General Dodonna's effect. My opponent has Krennic swing into the Cantina Braggart, doing 2 damage and taking no damage in return because the Cantina Braggart has 0 attack. I have my Alliance X-Wing swing in, landing 3 damage thanks to the buff from Dodonna. And I still have Sabine to deploy this turn. My opponent sends in another Super Laser Technician, this time ambushing, to kill the Cantina Braggart and actually remain alive. I'm going to deploy Sabine, and I have Sabine hit direct. I have Sabine hit Director Krennic there for 3. So why am I attacking Krennic instead of just going for the base? The answer is that like when I attacked Colonel Yularen earlier, Director Krennic's restore ability is a huge obstacle for me. And I really want to clear out that restore to prevent him from healing 2 from the base each turn, which is a huge obstacle if I'm trying to push aggression through and I'm not like really close to closing out the game. My opponent deploys another Academy Defense Walker, giving an experience token to Director Krennic. Definitely not something that I want to see here. 5/5 when played, give an experience token to each friendly damage unit, and it does have Sentinel. So I'm probably going to play both the cards that I have in my hand this turn. I play a Fleet Lieutenant and send Sabine in to trade with the Academy Defense Walker. She is only 2 attack base, but she gets +1 from Dodonna since she's a rebel, and +2 from the Fleet Lieutenant, allowing her to defeat the Defense Walker in 1 hit, also doing 1 damage with her on attack ability to the enemy base when she does that. So that kind of opens up the ground arena for the moment, and we'll see what happens next. Krennic swings for my base this time. I'm a little surprised because I assumed my opponent would clear Dodonna, so I'm gonna have Dodonna hit the enemy base for 4. My opponent hits the Fleet Lieutenant for 2 with the Super Laser Technician, adding 2 resources. I score 3 damage with my Alliance X-Wing, and I then play the Green Squadron A-Wing as well. So right now, my opponent has more resources than me and is, potentially in a spot to play bigger, stronger stuff. Also has more cards in hand, but I have a pretty strong presence on board. Let's see what happens here. Let's see if I can retain that. In theory, I think it's unlikely to actually pan out this way, but I think in theory, have lethal on the board this turn. Because I could do 4 damage with the A-Wing, 3 damage with the X-Wing, so that's 7. Got another 4 from General Dodonna for 11, and that's lethal. And my Fleet Lieutenant is standing by for another 2 in principle. However, in practice, I think it's very likely my opponent's going to be able to kill some of my units, which will make that a more difficult prospect. Okay, so Krennic attacks here, and takes out Dodonna, taking 4 damage. I decide I'm going to have my Fleet Lieutenant attack into Krennic here to clear out Krennic and create a situation where I don't have that restore constantly healing my opponent's base to take it further out of range of my aggression. And my hope is that I'm then going to play Dodonna and attack with my space units. However, my opponent plays Count Dooku and immediately kills my A-Wing. It has a when played that can kill a unit with 4 or less HP. So my Green Squadron A-Wing is defeated. I then swing in for 2 damage with the X-Wing and 1 to each base with Sabine. But the arrival of Count Dooku there is a big problem for me, especially because Count Dooku is shielded. I don't really have a great counter to shield tokens in this deck because my removal is damage based. My best hope is to draw a Fang Fighter, which can defeat an upgrade, or a copy of Aggression. So Aggression, I could choose to defeat an upgrade and use that to remove the shield, and then also deal damage. My opponent attempts to play, or it looked like my opponent was playing a second Count Dooku, but I think it was the wrong card. Instead, plays a Takedown, defeating my X-Wing, defeating it with 5 or less remaining HP. And unfortunately, the cards that I've drawn here are very bad against Count Dooku. So I have two copies of Fighters for Freedom. I play a Fighters for Freedom. This at least makes Count Dooku attack it and kill it and lose his shield. Like, it could be worse. I'm going to play another Fighters for Freedom. And my opponent could just take the initiative here and kill them with Count Dooku. I would then be able to Tarkin Talon Count Dooku, but he has another one in hand. My opponent plays Admiral Piet, which I don't love seeing. I'm going to take the initiative. That will at least get me 3 damage to the base by swinging with the Fighters for Freedom. And we'll see if I can get more. Unfortunately, I draw another Fighters for Freedom and a General Dodonna. That's really not what I want to see here. I would really like to see a copy of Aggression or Open Fire. um, I want to have more of a counter to my opponent's Count Dooku. I would also ideally like to see more space units rather than ground units because my opponent has some strong presence in the ground arena but doesn't have anything in space. So maybe some more A-wings or similar would be able to sneak through the defenses. I would also quite like to see my I'd also quite like to see Mace Windu here, who's the top of my curve and would be able to take out multiple enemy units and deal damage to the base. My opponent's ambushes in My opponent ambushes in Agent Callus and defeats the Fighters for Freedom. I defeat Agent Callus with Tarkentown. My opponent swings at my base with Count Dooku, which I'm actually quite happy to see, because it now means I can deploy the Fighters for Freedom and there isn't an immediate opponent against them. My opponent then deploys an Emperor's Royal Guard, and I'm going to take the initiative here. The Royal Guard has Sentinel, but because Fighters for Freedom have Saboteur, they can bypass it. So I can do some solid damage to my opponent's base directly. And looking at my hand here, I drew a Fleet Lieutenant and a Wampa. So my plan here is what I'm going to try to do is first I'll play the Fleet Lieutenant to send the Fighters for Freedom in for bonus damage. That will do 5 damage to the opposing base, leaving my opponent on only 2 life. And then maybe I'll actually be able to have it swing into the Emperor's Royal Guard and overwhelm it if I can give it a buff, but it's kind of dire straits. So my opponent first was like, no, you have to attack the Royal Guard, but I pointed out that the Fighters for Freedom have Saboteur, allowing them to bypass that. Another thing is that if my opponent doesn't kill the Fighters for Freedom immediately, I can play either of the cards that I have in hand, which will deal 1 damage to the opponent's base, because Fighters for Freedom deals 1 damage when you play another red card. And then I'll be able to use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base and win the game. When you play another aggression card, you may deal 1 damage to a base. However, my opponent has a overwhelming barrage, which allows him to take out both of my units here. Really, really not what I want to see. I do some quick math at this point, and my opponent has 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 damage on the board. So if I use Sabine's ability, my opponent can just all out attack me and win the game. But if I don't use Sabine's ability, I'll be alive at 1 life if my opponent doesn't all out attack. And that means that I might have some chance to win. So I'm going to pass. My opponent hits my base for 7. I'm gonna play out my Wampa in the hopes of if I had like a surprise strike with this Wampa, I could use the overwhelm there to actually win. But my opponent plays this smart. Instead of attacking with his other units or doing anything else, he just takes the initiative, and that's the game because I don't have anything that can stop him from just attacking my base with the first action next turn with Count Dooku. So that's kind of checkmate. So. Interesting game there. Ultimately, a victory for my opponent, and we're going to go into game 3. All right, game three. Once again, Aggression Sabine taking on a Command Krennic deck. All right, this time I'll be going first, and I have a strong opening play here with the Green Squadron A-Wing. 1/3 with Raid 2 for 2. Very strong card for pushing damage in the space arena. My opponent plays Admiral Piet, and not a ton I can do about it. So I'm gonna go for the classic wing leader into the turn one play. This is a classic play pattern, really strong. A wing leader buffing the rebel that you played on the first turn is a really solid aggressive start. So now my Green Squadron A-Wing is actually going to be able to attack for 5 damage here. Now, one interesting note is that this turn I took the initiative instead of using Sabine's ability. I think that was actually a mistake, and I should have used Sabine's ability. And the reason is I was worried about open fire just killing my A-wing, but my opponent doesn't actually have aggression in their aspects here, so open fire wasn't a consideration. And similarly, there wasn't any real fear of something like that entrenched play from the first game because I was in a separate arena. So I could have let my opponent have the initiative there, and I think it would have been fine. Uh, and I would have preferred to get the extra damage through. We'll see whether or not that ends up mattering. But I think that initiative is an important dynamic in this game, and characters like Sabine, who have an ability that you can use for free, but sometimes it will cost you the ability to retain the initiative. I think those are going to be important tests of like what is important, like what should you be focused on in the game. So my opponent leads off here with a Emperor's Royal Guard attack into my base, inflicting 3 damage. Uh, I'm going to I'm going to think about my options here, and I end up deciding that I'm going to deploy General Dodonna, the 4 cost 4/4 that gives +1/+1 to my other units. My opponent plays an entrenched on his Emperor's Royal Guard, making it a 6/7. Not what I most want to see there, but I could still have Dodonna attack into it and then clear it with Tarkentown. I attack here with my A-wing, and I think my opponent mistakenly takes only 5 damage there instead of 6. It should be 6 with +1 from Dodonna. And then the wing leader goes in there for 3. My opponent has played another entrenched on the Emperor's Royal Guard, so it's going to be a big problem. And I think then maybe realizes the life total thing and changes it. Not sure exactly what happened there. I'm going to use Sabine's ability. My opponent's down to only 9 life, and I have a dominant presence in space. But the super buffed Emperor's Royal Guard is a problem. And my opponent starts resourcing, but I actually opt to deploy Sabine and just have her attack into the Royal Guard and immediately be defeated because it gets 1 more damage to the enemy base. And it also puts some damage on that Emperor's Royal Guard, who I'm hoping I'm going to be able to remove with Tarkin Town. Uh, However, my opponent plays a overwhelming barrage on that buffed Royal Guard. So that's going to be a total of 11 damage, which is enough to wipe my board completely. Not what you want to see here. And under the circumstances, it seems like my best move is just to play this Starwing Scout. It's in the space arena, so my opponent can't deal with it immediately. My opponent deploys Krennic. I'm going to use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. The one good thing about these entrenched upgrades on my opponent's Royal Guard is that they do mean that the Royal Guard can't actually attack my base, which would be a big problem otherwise. And so I end up just taking the initiative there, and Piet hits my base for another 1 damage. That Royal Guard is very mighty, and I'm not drawing stuff that's awesome here. So luckily the Starwing Scout is a very strong unit in this situation. So not only can it attack for 4 in an uncontested space arena, which I will lead off by doing. If my opponent removes it, because I have the initiative, I'll actually draw 2 cards, which would be really strong for me. So my opponent has Krennic hitting my base and healing. I play the mission briefing to draw 2 cards, first time I've played that card, and I get a quite fortunate draw here with another copy of Starwing Scout. That's going to allow me to put on even more pressure in the space arena. And yeah, second Starwing Scout on the field. My opponent takes the initiative this time, and then I'm going to ping both bases. And we're now actually at a pretty critical point because my opponent has exactly 6 life. Attacking with Krennic will heal the opponent's base for 2 life, but each of the Starwing Scouts swings for 4. So that means that if each of these Starwing Scouts gets to attack this turn, even with the healing from Krennic, I will still be able to destroy the enemy base. Krennic swings into my base, dealing 2 damage and healing the enemy base for 2. My Starwing Scout inflicts 4 damage. If there's no answer here, I'm going to win. But my opponent has a Count Dooku to kill the other Starwing Scout. However, at this point, my opponent's tapped out and doesn't have lethal. I have a bunch of cards that I could play, but there's no point. I'm just going to take the initiative. And the reason is, yeah, my opponent can hit me with the remaining stuff, but on the next turn, my Starwing Scout just swings in and wins the game. And yeah, my opponent types GG. So interesting games there. Ultimately, I was able to win 2 out of 3, which is a little surprising to me given the matchup. I sort of thought that with the defensive nature of a Vigilance command deck and the restore options, first off with Krennic, but then also there's other ways to gain life in those colors. We're going to stymie me, and also an interesting dynamic because 2 of the different games had the kind of initiative checkmate going on there, where one player is able to secure the victory by taking the initiative early on in the turn, not using all the stuff that they could do, and then just being in a position where they have a strong unit that can attack in to close out the game. And so in the second game, my opponent was able to do that with that Count Dooku instead of trying to do anything with the other units or attack into my Wampa or do anything like that. Just taking the initiative meant that Dooku was going to be able to go first and clear my base on the opponent's turn. And then in this game, my Starwing Scout is in that same position where I didn't even play a single card this turn. All I need to do was take the initiative once my opponent was at 4 life and hadn't cleared the scout. So very interesting games. Initiative, I think, is going to be an important dynamic for aggressive decks and for Sabine in particular. So this series of games may be highlighting that to a degree. All right, well, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. Also, if you want to see a written introduction to Star Wars Unlimited, you can check out my I have a blog article that I wrote over at The Fifth Trooper. The Fifth Trooper is a Star Wars tabletop fan site. They have a lot of content for Star Wars Legion and also for Star Wars Shatterpoint, and I am going to be working with them to create content for Star Wars Unlimited as well, and put some written articles up for them. So get hyped for that, and yeah. More videos coming soon. I've been uploading daily these sorts of gameplay commentaries. So yeah, stay tuned and feel free to subscribe if you like checking out this sort of stuff. Thanks again for watching, guys, and we will be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.